everyone for joining us. I'd like to introduce Dr. Miriam Sollman. She is a neuropsychologist with Prisma Health in South Carolina. And she is part of the HD clinic there with the Center of Excellence with the University of South Carolina in Columbia. University of South Carolina School of Medicine in Columbia. Some of you may know her. HD Reach is actually very familiar with her, and we are thrilled to have her with us. So without further ado, I am going to switch it over to Miriam, and I'm going to make you host, and I will be on the sidelines if you need me.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. I'm going to talk about some things that are relevant to everyone, regardless of whether you may or may not have Huntington's disease. These principles are going to apply to everyone's brain, okay? And specifically, we'll be talking about starting healthy new habits to help your brain with the aging process. Those of you just joining us now, please make sure that your camera and your microphone are off. So a little bit of background about the brain here, first of all. The brain is made up of something called gray matter, which is the cells or the neuronal bodies that have the cell's machinery, the energy, and the storage. And that's the gray matter mostly that you see on the outside layer of the brain there. Then there is the white matter, which is heavily insulated because information is going to travel down white matter very quickly. And this is what allows information to travel from one cell to the other. And here is a depiction of white matter pathways within a healthy brain from two different views in a brain imaging scan. And then also we have the blood vessels. These range in size from microscopic to larger arteries, capillaries, and veins. And it's really important to think of both the blood vessels and the white matter as forming sort of like a highway where you've got larger connections that branch off into medium size, that then branch off into even smaller connections. What I want you to know about blood is that blood is an irritant, and so it really needs to stay within the blood vessels. And here is a depiction of the branching of the arteries, capillaries, and veins. Okay. Now, within the brain, messages are communicated between cells along these complex roadways using chemicals and electricity primarily, okay? And this system has to have a very delicate balance. It's a lot like when you're cooking your favorite recipe. If you put a little too much of something in, it's not going to be just right, okay? And having those correct chemicals and in the right amount is dependent on, first of all, what you put into your body, such as your nutrition, any vitamins or supplements you take, any alcohol or drugs that you use, your level of hydration. It's also dependent on how healthy the rest of your organs are and your teeth and gums. Believe it or not, our brain health and our heart health is very heavily linked to the health of our teeth and our gums. It's also contingent upon getting the appropriate rest and also being able to move your body, avoiding toxic stress levels and those harmful chemicals that I've already mentioned, and also avoiding or preventing psychiatric illness. And I'm going to talk about all of these concepts today, okay? The brain's biochemical environment, those are the neurotransmitters and the peptides and things like that. What I want you to know is that water is important to pull toxins out. So hydration is incredibly important. Unfortunately, sometimes as we get older, we don't feel as thirsty, and so we don't drink as much water. Stress leads our body to release harmful chemicals like cortisol, and that's going to affect the memory system. Stress also leads to inflammation, and we are finding that inflammation in the body and especially in the brain is one of the leading causes of decline in brain health. That's where the science is going in terms of Alzheimer's prevention, for example. And then also medications and drugs that impact our neurotransmitters. And these are going to be things like not only like antidepressants and stuff like that, but things like sleep aids such as Benadryl or Unisom. These things can mimic the chemical environment of Alzheimer's disease and really burden the brain, okay? brain's roadways can also be damaged by injury. So if you think about getting a head injury, your brain is going to move within the skull, and there's going to be shearing or tearing of not only those white matter messenger tracks, but also of the blood vessels that allows that blood that's an irritant to get out. Things like having oxygen deprivation, illnesses, and COVID is a great example of that, because COVID is an inflammatory disease, and psychiatric illnesses as well, and then neurodegenerative diseases. So things like Huntington's disease affects the brain in very specific ways, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, all of those, okay? And I have a great little picture here of a path through the woods that's been laid down by lots of people going over the same path. The same thing happens with the brain. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, okay? Accumulation of lots of tiny injuries in the brain can add up like drops of water in a rain bucket. So if you think of the term microvascular disease, if you've heard that before, when you have migraines or high blood pressure or high cholesterol, and it causes tiny, tiny silent strokes or white matter lesions that show up on brain imaging. When you have one or two of those, you don't really notice any impact on your cognition or on your speed of thinking or your movement or things like that. But when you've got hundreds of them, they really do add up. And also, where in the brain an injury happens, either from a stroke or a TBI or a disease, affects predictable thinking skills, movement, and emotions. And that's why some diseases have very characteristic ways of people behaving or moving, like Huntington's disease, okay? Scientific research in the past few years has really blossomed, and we've learned two incredibly important things that I want to share with you, and that's really the purpose for this talk. Now, first of all, how we can prevent injury to the brain's delicate systems, and also how to slow brain aging, even when genetics are not in your favor, even if you're told that you're going to develop Huntington's disease or another condition at some point in your lifetime. Most of our knowledge on these points of brain aging comes from studying two different conditions. One is another movement disorder, namely Parkinson's disease, which I'm sure everyone here has heard of. And the other is another neurodegenerative disorder that primarily affects thinking skills, first of all, and that's Alzheimer's disease, okay? And both of these are neurodegenerative conditions that affect cognition, movement, and emotions and behavior, okay? And the key findings that we've landed upon through our research is, first of all, that that highway I talked about in the brain on which information flows through white matter pathways, the same pathways that are used for movement and balance and coordination are the same pathways in which thoughts flow, okay? So by keeping our movement strong, exercising, we're going to help preserve our thinking skills and our emotions and our personality. And that's going to help slow down the progression of any neurodegenerative diseases. And then also, damage done to our brain through various health conditions that I'm going to talk about in a moment can also cause neurodegenerative conditions to start earlier and to move faster. And so for people who are worried that they may have HD, or who know that they have HD and are worried about when it might begin, it's really important to keep these things in mind, because you can slow down the progression of your disease, and you can prevent it from moving, from starting as early or as young, okay? So what are the demons that affect the brain the most? I'm going to talk about things that plague Americans. So first of all, sleep apnea is a really big one, and sleep deprivation, too much sleep, not getting enough oxygen when we're sleeping, are going to impact our memory system. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Sugar, unfortunately, sugar is incredibly bad for the brain, and that's not just for diabetics or people who have high blood blood sugar for other reasons. Okay. Any condition that affects the blood flow through the brain. So that's going to be our blood pressure, cholesterol accumulation within the blood vessels that prevents blood from moving through quickly. Mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, and chronic stress. Chemical exposures, again, sleep aids are really terrible for us. Alcohol, tobacco products, marijuana, and other drugs, and illnesses that cause inflammation. And these diseases and illnesses, what they do is they affect the brain in a way that the cells die and we have shrinkage, which is what you see on the right side of the screen. So sleep apnea, I promised you I'd come back to that. What it does is it causes our brain to be deprived of oxygen. When we're sleeping, our brain is rehearsing memories. And so the memory center doesn't get enough oxygen, and it can lead to shrinkage of the memory center, which can look like Alzheimer's disease on a brain scan. It can also cause small and large strokes through that deprivation of oxygen and through changes in the blood pressure that happen with it. And in my opinion, sleep apnea is a leading cause of dementia. It's something that can get the ball rolling on things like Alzheimer's disease. So presumably it can make Huntington's disease start younger and move faster as well. Sugar, highly addictive. What it does is it causes the blood vessels of the brain to become more fragile and to break or to leak, lets that blood out, which is an irritant, which is then going to cause more cell death. It also causes inflammation. And then it's going to cause diabetes and insulin resistance that is going to affect other systems within the body, therefore having a downward effect on the brain as well. Okay. And then the drugs and alcohol, there are no safe amounts. I know there was a research study that said that people who have small amounts of wine or beer or liquor tend to be healthier, but that study was actually very, very flawed. And if you have questions about that, we can talk about that sideline. But unfortunately, alcohol is really toxic for the brain, as is tobacco products. And we know that these cause Huntington's disease to start younger. The same is true for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other conditions, okay? And then chemicals like sleep aids. Right now, melatonin is the only safe sleep aid that we know of, but the others create an environment that mimics Alzheimer's disease, and they deplete our thinking skills over time. Not only are we going to feel worse the next day and not be as sharp the next day, but over time, those systems are going to decline. Inflammation from autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, but also from things that we eat, leads to death of cells and neurons, okay? So those are the things that harm us. What about things that help us? Number one, education. Learning helps our brains to form multiple new connections. Those connections strengthen the brain, especially becoming bilingual, studying a foreign language, studying music. Those are great things for the brain. Exercise, we're finding out, is incredibly powerful for the brain to form new connections. We used to think that you couldn't develop new cells or connections within the brain, but you absolutely can through exercise. So I'll talk about that more. Sleep leads to restoration of those important chemicals and rehearsals of memories. Fasting is another area that science is exploring, and I'd encourage you to talk to your doctors and read about intermittent fasting as well as longer fasts, which may help our brain to get rid of some of those toxic proteins that build up, if you've heard about the protein accumulation in Alzheimer's disease. And then again, I'm going to say it, preventing depression, anxiety, chronic stress, and treating these conditions helps strengthen our brains. There is research that antidepressants like Lexapro, if you can take it safely, are associated with having less Alzheimer's disease pathology in the brain. So again, anything that you can do for your brain health, whether you're striving to delay onset of Huntington's disease or to avoid other neurodegenerative conditions, the better you're going to do. So now that we know the bad and the good and the ugly about things in our life and in our environments that affects the brain's health, I'm going to talk about how you can make some changes, because change is very, very difficult. first of all, it's really important to recognize that change is a process. It takes time, it takes persistence, it takes commitment. You're going to have peaks and valleys in your process of change where you're going to feel like you're doing great, you're doing all the things you need to, and then maybe you sort of fall off the wagon, you don't do what you're supposed to. That's normal, okay? Just keep plugging away, keep trying. Remember that walking is a great analogy. You didn't learn to walk in a week or a month, and you had lots of falls. So keep that in mind as you're working on building healthy new habits, okay? It's also really important to plan to change gradually rather than diving in head first. Plan for it to be a slow process. And before you start working on changing, ask yourself what things you might need to cut from your life to make room for change, to make time, energy for new and healthy behavior. Remind yourself that when you're better rested, when you're less stressed and more organized through this change process, you're also going to have more free time as a result of that. You're going to become more efficient at doing everyday things. You'll be thinking faster and more clearly, okay? So you'll end up, by reorganizing your life and starting to have healthy new habits, you'll be more clear and have more time. And think about a logical timeline for introducing changes, okay? Change is easier to do when you start by identifying a clear goal. For example, I want to lose weight for a family reunion in 3 months, or I want to quit smoking because it is bad for my brain. So start at a turning point in your mind, such as a new year, January 1st, or a birthday, or a new season. We've got spring starting here in a few days. Identify small goals that can contribute to the bigger goals. So for example, if you want to talk about changing your diet, maybe think about what foods you want to cut out and what foods you want to add in, okay? It's helpful to have a change or motivation buddy or partner, someone who goes through this process with you, even if their goals might be just slightly different from yours. It's helpful to let the people in your environment, the people you live with or work with or spend a lot of time with, know that you're working on this project or goal so that they can help prevent you from being tempted to break your healthy steps. For example, if you're focusing on cutting out sugar, you want to let them know that so that they don't try to push that chocolate cake on you, okay? And constantly take breaks to reflect and remind yourself why you're changing. So for example, I'm working on cutting out sugar because as a neuropsychologist, I know that sugar is going to make it more likely that I develop Alzheimer's disease as well as diabetes, okay? And constantly also reflect on the progress that you're making towards your goals, the things that you were good at, and the areas that you might need to work on a little bit more. So what you're doing is you're taking breaks to take a bird's eye view and reflect on how things are going, okay? Some things that are really helpful in this process are a 7-day planner and also a bullet journal. And you can look these things up on Google and Pinterest, and you can get them for free as templates. So I'm going to talk about ways to address some specific focused areas of change here, starting with sleep, which might be one of the most important things. You know, we're finding if you don't get enough sleep that you're more likely to develop dementia. Same thing if you get too much sleep, that can be bad for the brain for some reason. I recently published a short article on this in the HD Reach newsletter, and that's available if you just do a Google search for my last name and sleep. And what I talk about in that article is that it is possible to train your brain to sleep easily, to fall asleep at the same time every night and for the same length of time. How much sleep is important for you is going to vary by your age and your own health conditions. But what you want to do is you want to feel rested when you wake up in the morning and not need more sleep on your weekend or your day off. Okay. Maybe getting a couple minutes here and there extra is okay. But in general, we need less sleep as we age. We're going to talk about programming your brain to fall asleep at a predictable time routine and through use of cues. So this is when you take 30 minutes before your bedtime to have a wind down routine. You have your tea, do your stretching, take a warm shower, those sorts of things. Always do them in the same sequence. And then using music is really, really helpful to help you to fall asleep. And so what you do with that is you make a playlist of the same songs that you play in the same order. It needs to be music that is predictable. You can follow along in your mind. And as it plays, when your mind goes to something else, say, oh, nope, I'm focusing on the music, and recenter yourself to the music. What happens is over time, you start to fall asleep earlier and earlier in the playlist to the point that eventually, as soon as you press play, you're going to fall asleep. Now, this process is going to take weeks to months for most people. Okay. And then another important thing for sleep is to set boundaries. So oftentimes when we're lying in bed, our mind starts to think about worries or things that didn't go well during the day. And you have to commit to not letting those things steal your sleep time from you. Okay. So you have to say, this is my time for me, my restoration. I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to focus on having good dreams and getting to sleep on time. Okay. Talking about exercise, I can't stress enough how helpful and important exercise is for the brain. Okay. And again, we're finding that this delays onset of dementias like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease and presumably Huntington's disease. There are different types of exercise and they all affect the brain in a different way. So, you know how I talked about the brain having different organizational structure to it and different pathways. Cardiovascular exercise is probably the most important. That's the exercise that gets your heart rate up. It helps with formation of new connections within the brain, combating toxic anxiety, building healthy chemicals like endorphins, and increasing the blood flow and the oxygen to the brain. And this is things like brisk walking or riding a stationary bike or swimming. The important thing about cardio exercise is it needs to be sustained. So you can't say like, I'm doing 2 minutes here and 2 minutes there. You need to work on getting a good 30 to 60 minutes of it if you can. And you want to very gradually work your way up to 5 to 6 days a week, maybe starting with just 2 to 3 minutes and increasing a minute a day. Okay. And so with strength exercise, the larger the muscle group of the body, the more real estate it has within the brain. So you want to exercise your legs, your core, and your arms. And I recommend you do this 2 to 3 days weekly. Balance training is another really important type of exercise, and this requires integrating many different areas of the brain. It's going to help us prevent falls and head injuries, which are going to make dementia happen faster and stronger. And then coordination activities such as Tai Chi and yoga, playing musical instruments, practicing typing, all of these things are really, really important as well. Okay. All right, so how to exercise. First of all, pick a time of day, like I said, that you're going to feel your best and just write it into your schedule, do it. With any habit that you want to form, pairing it with something that you enjoy, sort of like a reward, is going to help you move along. So for example, if you really enjoy watching a specific show on TV, do your exercise during that. It's like dangling the carrot in front of your face, okay? And then nutrition, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So first of all, I would encourage everybody to read about different diets that are healthy for our brain, the MIND diet and the DASH diet, they have real support in science, and they're going to help slow down the process of dementia and slow down the onset date for us. Avoid refined sugar like white sugar. Try to use lower glycemic sugars like agave nectar. And eat foods that are high in fiber like oats and grains that will help remove cholesterol that's going to clog up our arteries and our blood vessels. Eat in routines and in predictable intervals, and consider intermittent fasting, which is going to do good things for our blood sugar. And avoid high sodium, because that's going to raise your blood pressure, which can lead to rupturing of those blood vessels. The other things that are important are nutrition. So when we have nutritional deficiencies, like a B vitamin deficiency or an iron deficiency, this can affect our thinking skills and our movement, and it can affect us in irreversible, permanent ways. So we really need to be eating a healthy diet and getting the nutrition that we need. Hydration, as I've already said before, drinking enough water is an important part of this because it helps our body to filter out toxins and to keep our brain cells alive and working well. Keep in mind, sugar and fat are addictive, and so we can't listen to our body's cravings to know what we should be eating. Use these sparingly as rewards. So for example, if you set exercise goals for yourself, allow yourself to have that piece of cake or something like that as a reward, okay? Train your body to want healthy foods. When you first stop eating a lot of sugar and high fat foods, it's gonna be painful, literally. You might get headaches and just feel sluggish and terrible as your body is going through that withdrawal. Just be aware of that. It's gonna be short term. Avoid simple carbs like white bread and pasta. Replace them with high fiber grains instead. Eat more nutritious foods such as raw vegetables and fruits. To help yourself on your nutrition kick, have things prepared for you like vegetables and fruits that are already chopped, ready to go in your fridge or in your freezer. Avoid picking up the things that are not good foods from the grocery store, okay? Meal plan. Think about spending your Sundays making a plan of menus for the week, and preparing some foods for lunch or for dinner. You're also going to find that when you do this, you save money from grab and go on the run. Avoid eating out, especially fast food. This is very bad for the brain. And another one is don't overeat. When you get full and start to feel sleepy, there's an inflammatory process that's happening in the brain, and that's actually really bad for us, we're finding. So have smaller portion sizes, slow down and enjoy your meal, be mindful, okay? Think of healthy substitutes for your cravings. So if you're craving a piece of cake, maybe have a piece of fruit instead, and you'll find that after you have that, that sugar craving is less strong. And consider a program such as Noom that can help you with your nutrition goals. I'm going to talk about some psychological or cognitive health strategies for change as well. So first of all, medications such as antidepressants like Wellbutrin or SSRIs and SNRIs, things like Prozac and Zoloft, and mood stabilizers, these are really good for us if they're needed. Like I said before, we're seeing that you have less Alzheimer's disease in your brain when you take some of these medications. They also prevent damage to our brain from depression and anxiety and manic episodes itself, okay? Avoid using nighttime medications that cause sleepiness like antidepressants, trazodone, and doxepin, because again, these mimic Alzheimer's disease and will affect thinking skills. Also avoid anxiety medications that are rescue agents like Ativan, Valium, and Atarax for the same reason. So these are going to affect our thinking skills and have a long-term impact on our cognition, make dementia processes move more quickly. Okay. If you need to, ask your doctor to do genetic testing to figure out what medication is the best for your depression or anxiety or any other psychological illness you're experiencing. Another strategy is to set boundaries to prevent other people's stresses or the stress of the world and the news from coming in and impacting you. There are great strategies for setting boundaries. There's something called DBT skills that you can learn about in a group therapy setting, or you can get books on that. But also just making rules for yourself, such as if you're feeling anxious, avoiding things that cause anxiety, like watching news or having conversations that are difficult with people. Practice taking perspective. So maybe you're upset about something really bad that's happened in your life. Balance it out like a teeter-totter by thinking about the things that are going well for you in your life. Maybe it's that you have a roof over your head or a pillow to lay your head on at night, when not everyone does have those things. Okay, perspective taking can be really, really helpful. Seek assistance from a therapist, from clergy, from family or friends. Don't try to bottle things up. Don't try to tackle all the stress by yourself. It might involve having other people come and help you clean or do your grocery shopping and things like that for you. That's all going to be helpful. And then use calming strategies like prayer, meditation, deep breathing, mindfulness, and guided meditations. And YouTube is a great source for these skills. I want to give you an example of a meditation or mindfulness skill. One is called savoring the moment. And to learn this skill, what you're going to do is you're going to learn to eat mindfully. So take a piece of chocolate or a sweet and put it in your hand and look at it. What does it look like in your hand? Smell it. What does it smell like? You're walking yourself through the five senses. How does it feel as it breaks in your fingertips? And then put it on the very tip of your tongue. What does it taste like? What are you experiencing in your mouth? Put it at the back of your tongue. What does it taste like then? Okay, so really take your time to go through the different senses. Take a deep breath, and as you take a deep breath in, you're going to notice that the smell and the taste change again, because our sense of smell is important in our sense of taste. So eating mindfully like this can cause you to slow down and be focused and not have your mind jumping around in a bunch of different places, okay? You can do the same for thoughts and stressors in your life. So break them down into bite-sized pieces. Get a piece of paper and write things out that are stressful to you. Process them one by one. Be routine and habitual in your day as well, because the less that you have on your mind in the moments, the more focused you can be. So for example, doing your grocery shopping every Tuesday. That way you don't have to think about when you're going to get to the grocery store. Plan ahead. Use a 7-day planner. I hinted at that earlier today, that you review each morning and evening so you know about your schedule. As much as you can, use memory aids like calendars and electronic alarms, and organizational aids like your 7-day planner, but also things like Alexa or Google Home, where you can have timers set and you can speak things to your organizer. You want to prevent yourself from holding too much on your mind, because what research tells us is that every little thought that our brain has, every little thing that we try to hold on our mind, like, did I lock my door? Did I turn off the stove? Did I turn off the light? Did I brush my teeth? All of that can be swirling around in the back of our brains silently, but it takes up speed and energy in our brain, just like a computer running many different programs at once, okay? So don't hold these things in your mind as much as possible. Use routine, doing things in the same order, being structured, and putting things down on your planner or in your organizational aids to prevent yourself from having these things on the back of your mind. Okay. When you're making lifestyle changes, write things into your schedule. I've mentioned the schedule so many times. I hope that seed has been planted, but it really does help to break it down. Use small bits or bite-sized portions and ramp up your change very slowly. Another strategy I've mentioned is pairing something you enjoy with something you need to do, like TV while you're on your exercise bike, or listening to a podcast while you're walking, or listening to a radio program you like while you're doing your meal prep. You can join programs to help you form your new habits or work with a partner. You can study about making change and about goal setting. There are some great webinars or podcasts on change. There's an economist named Katie Milkman, that's an easy name to remember, who has an hour-long seminar on how to change. And I'd encourage you to look that up on YouTube. There are also some great books at the library about change. Again, take a break each day, each week to reflect upon your progress and your growth, as well as why you're doing this. The key is that we're doing this to help our brain's health, to slow down dementia processes, to slow down disease processes, to delay the onset. And lastly, some changes such as sleep training and learning meditation skills are going to take a lot of time and practice. And so when you feel like these things aren't working for you, don't just quit or throw in the towel and say, this isn't working, but say, you know what? It's just like learning to walk. I've got to keep doing, chip away at it slowly and work on it slowly. Okay. So I'm going to pause here so that we can look at the questions that people had. And I'm going to start with the one someone asked why smoking or tobacco is bad for us. So nicotine by itself actually is not bad for us. As far as we know, nicotine by itself, like you get in Nicorette gum, is actually a mental enhancer. It can help us with our focus. But cigarettes have a lot of chemicals in them, things like arsenic, that are very toxic to our brain. They're going to cause tiny strokes and shrinkage of the brain, but also importantly, the things that we smoke are going to clog up our lungs, and it's going to prevent us from getting good oxygen to our brain. Okay. And then there's this idea of the withdrawal. So anytime your brain is craving a substance that it doesn't get, that withdrawal causes damage to the neurons in our brain. And so that's why even things such as CBD can be very, very bad for us. Let me look to the chats here. So someone asked about trazodone. Now, trazodone is an agent that can be used for sleep as well as for treating depression. And one of the problems we're finding with trazodone is that because it's a sedating medication, like I talked about earlier, when it's sedating, it's causing that chemical environment that is similar to Alzheimer's disease. It dries up a chemical that we need to have in our brain while we're sleeping so that our brains can practice rehearsing memories and other thinking skills. So unfortunately, we're finding that trazodone can be bad for the brain. And there's always the question as to, you know, when do I seek help for sleep when it's a really big problem for me, because sleep is so important for preventing dementia and slowing down dementia. And I would say first, work with someone on learning some of the sleep skills that I talk about in the HD Reach newsletter article, as well as in this lecture. Work on those behavioral strategies first, and you'll find very often that you can stop using sleep aids. The research also says that having tranquilized sleep like you get from things like Ambien doesn't lead our brains to be more restored. So the sleep aids aren't actually as good as we think they are. Okay. Do we have other questions? Here's one. Yes. Do I have a meal plan? So, everybody's diet and needs are very different. I really recommend reading about the MIND diet, MIND, all capital letters, and reading about the DASH diet. The DASH diet is one to reduce sodium, but reducing sodium isn't necessary for everyone. Some people actually need a high sodium content, especially if they have a condition called dysautonomia. So you really want to talk to your doctor about your own meal plan. But high fiber is important, low sugar is important, good fats are important, like you get from the Mediterranean diet, which is why the MIND diet is recommended. Unfortunately, in certain countries, we have foods that are culturally important to us. Like in the United States, we love our hamburgers and our fried food. And unfortunately, these are really bad for us. In other countries, they eat a lot of red meat like goat, which can cause heart disease. The foods that affect our heart negatively are also going to affect our brain negatively. So nutrition is really, really important, but it's something that can be very hard to change when it's a part of your culture. So talking with a doctor who's of the same culture of you as you can help you make some suggestions for changes. But remember, change takes time. Remind yourself of why you're doing this. These are things that will absolutely help your brain, will help slow down the onset and the progression of HD if you are genetically predisposed to that, or to other diseases such as Alzheimer's, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, Parkinson's disease, you name it. Okay.
There's two questions. One is, what bad effects does Digoxin have on the brain? And I think I might have.
Doxepin. Yeah, so
Digoxin.
doxepin is an older generation antidepressant, and doxepin is one of the most powerful, what we call anticholinergic medications. So it dries up this chemical called acetylcholine that is really, really important for memory formation. Again, during the nighttime while we're sleeping is when our brain is rehearsing memories the most. We need that chemical there. And with doxepin, like other antidepressants like trazodone, you take it every night. And so you're constantly exposing your brain to this chemical. It's a lot like stopping watering your plant. The plant is going to say, well, I'm not going to get water anymore, so I can't live anymore. And once that death happens, you can't all of a sudden just stop the doxepin or the trazodone and expect the neurotransmitters to rejuvenate or regenerate to their prior healthy level. It doesn't happen. Just like you can't, once you've killed a plant by not watering, start watering it and expect it to regrow. Okay.
The second question is what vitamin supplements do you recommend?
That's a great question. So vitamin supplements and other supplements from vitamin B, vitamin D to iron, you should absolutely talk to your primary care doctor about before you take them, because there is such a thing as having too much of them in the brain and in the body, and that can do damage. With too much vitamin B, you start to have neuropathy, just like you have with too little, can affect the memory system. Too much vitamin D can cause calcium accumulation in the brain, which might affect the brain structure, so on and so forth. Too much iron or other metals causes deposits in the brain. So I don't recommend taking supplements until you talk to your doctor about what you need, but your doctor should be doing a physical to look at these nutritional levels in you, especially if you're having trouble eating and getting good nutrition, if you have any swallowing difficulty. Okay, make sure that you ask your doctor about testing for nutrition. And I see another question here, escitalopram oxalate. Yes, that is a great medication. So if you look up any medication you're taking, if it's in the class SSRI or SNRI, it's probably a great medication. Escitalopram is Lexapro, and research is showing that humans that take Lexapro actually have less Alzheimer's disease pathology in their brain. So it's a great thing. Preventing depression and preventing anxiety keeps our brain healthier. Every time we have a mood episode, like a depressive episode or a manic episode, it does damage, physical damage to the brain. So we want to prevent that from happening. And anxiety is a leading cause of depression. Well, I hope that you all found something helpful for you here today. And just remember, change is a slow process, takes time, keep chipping away at it.
Thank you, Dr. Sollman.
Yep.
Sure. And Kelly, I think Kelly is also with HD Reach, and I think you had a few announcements as well.
So just a thank you to our sponsors for making this possible. And a huge thank you to Miriam also for spending her Sunday with us and presenting.
My pleasure.